theology is a study of God's attributes and relations based on faith, practice, and experience. How is your faith? Is your faith growing stronger? Are you testing your faith? I heard from a young lady this morning, she's testing her faith to step away from her job and come to church. That's awesome. That's faith in practice. That's experiencing faith, allowing God to bless you, even in times where you don't think you're going to be blessed, when you think people are going to hold you back from doing what is right in God. So that's theology. It's an overview. If we sum up the whole nature of God, it's one word, isn't it? It is the word love. For God is love, right? He's love. And if we look at love, he loved and he created man and he created woman. Because of his love, because of his need to have relationships, he created man and woman in his image. And we are made with the capacity to love. We are made to have the capacity to love and to be loved. Our emotional and spiritual nature makes us somewhat like God in that sense that we can be loved and we can love. What a narrow experience of life if you don't ever feel love, or if you feel so rejected by so many people that you don't feel loved. And there's a lot of that in this world, isn't there, today? You see a lot of people that don't feel loved. Young people, the elderly in senior homes, sometimes they don't feel loved. And I feel honored to be in Shirley's presence because she honors her mother and goes there and takes care of her and helps her and lets her know that she's still part of the family. Our emotional and spiritual nature makes us somewhat like God then. God created the bond that creates our emotional passions and physical passions. As we develop this relation, these passions, that's what God wants from us, is to be passionate. He wants us to communicate with him, doesn't he? He wants us to pray to him. He wants us to read his word. He wants us to do those things that he asks us to do, to keep those things that he asks us to keep, to walk in the ways that he asks us to walk. The physical passions and emotional passions given us to the next step in this relationship or commitment, which is the union bond of called marriage, right? Marriage. Someday we might see Jordan getting married, but she's got to have the okay from every one of us first. Not just mom and dad. No, Jordan, I'm kidding. She says, we're eloping. That next step is marriage. It's a relationship commitment, and that is what we have with Jesus. We have a relationship commitment. You have a relationship commitment, don't you, Dee? You made that relationship commitment with Jesus. Yes, you do. And you made that public when you were baptized. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two become how many flesh? One flesh. It's a profound mystery, Ephesians 5 says, but I'm talking about Christ and the church. So he's comparing our relationship in marriage to our church relationship with Jesus, our faith relationship with Jesus. Isaiah calls the Lord's church the wife. He is the maker or the husband, Isaiah 54. For the maker is thine husband, and the Lord of hosts is his name. And thy Redeemer, the Holy One of Israel, the God of the whole earth, he shall be called. The church to Christ is that of a loving and pure wife. That's pretty amazing. Pure wife. That means a wife that's not trying to run around with everybody else, right? We think about Hosea and his wife. Today we look at, I think pastors and elders and people in the churches look at what is happening in our time, and as we reflect back, we can look all the way back to the pre-flood, that people were marrying and given in marriage. They didn't have any concern about God or godliness. Even though Noah was preaching the word to them, they were perverting the nature of God's plan. Perverting the nature of God's plan for relationships between a husband and wife. Society's acceptance of sexual ideas not within God's parameters has come with horrible consequences, hasn't it? We think about sex slavery. We think about nowadays all these people on the pornography sites. Now, some of you may not know all this, but people that I know are directly related, trying to help people using pornography, and they are on pornography sites for 4 to 6 hours a day. That's the relationship. That's a horrible, debased thing. And then you have disease, and all the other things come because we have perverted God's plan of sexual relationship, which is between a husband and a wife. Amen? Oh, thank you. There's this attack, and I think it's an interesting study because there's this attack, these institutions that were created during the creation week, marriage and the Sabbath. And we know from Ecclesiastes 1:9, there's nothing. So these things have been attacked since the very beginning, and they continue to be attacked today. God created sex, and we are sexual beings, and we're allowed and encouraged to be passionate with our wife. We're allowed to be encouraged and passionate with our husband, right? Now, it's necessary to have communication. Communication is one of the necessary ingredients for passion. If you communicate horrible things to your wife, is she going to be compassionate to you or passionate to you? How many times have you slept on the couch because of your communication? It's an ingredient that is needed, just like our ingredient to the Lord is our communication. Do we communicate with Him? Do we build that communication with Him? Are we passionate about praying to Him, about talking to Him, about loving Him? That's all part of the communication package. And I said this once in a sermon not too long ago, that God has this sense of humor, doesn't He, George? God created man and He created woman, two free thinkers with complete different communicative skills, and He tells them, okay, when you make this bond, you're going to stay together for how long? Forever. You got these two different people, and you're supposed to stay together forever. Now that's a sense of humor to me, because they're opposites. And I think about that. When I think about that, I think about this old man's communication to his, I don't know if it was a grandpa or the dad, communication to the son. Son, there's two things you have to remember before you get married. And he says, okay, what are they? He says, son, do you want to be happy? Or do you want to be right? When you argue with your wife, do you want to be happy or do you want to be right? So sometimes we find men that haven't been right in arguments for 15 years, but they're happy. Like Phil Robinson from Duck Dynasty says, they're happy, happy, happy. But we have to ask ourselves, communication, do you or have you had arguments in your marriage? Of course. If you haven't had arguments in your marriage, bless you, St. Paul, or whatever your name is in here. Arguments are a part of marriage, aren't they? And we argue, but we're told to do what? Not let the sun go down on your wrath or on your anger. Don't let your sun go down on your anger. You know, when I think about that saying in arguments and all, I think about the old man that when you go to Florida or maybe Phoenix, I've seen them probably both places, you see them walking down the sidewalks, and the woman is happy, happy, happy. She's up in front of the man 6 feet behind the woman, and he's shaking and trembling, and he's going, I am the man. I'm the man. And she finally says, what did you say? He says, nothing. He's like he was talking to himself, arguing with himself, trying to win back 50 years of arguments that he lost. But it didn't work, did it? I'm the man. It doesn't work. I am the man, but she is my equal, right? She is my equal. She is the woman. When I think about all that, I think about the first angel's message. You say, well, that's a quantum leap from marriage, communication, to the first angel's message. First angel's message in Revelation 14:6 says, to proclaim the salvation, to give God the glory, and to worship him who created all things. So if we give God the glory and worship him, that's communication, isn't it? Others about it. When you first got married, did you say something to anybody else, your family or anybody else, that you were married? Did you tell people? You were happy about it, weren't you? When you first come to Jesus, were you happy about it? Did you tell people? Yeah. You give them the glory. You proclaim it. Because he created all things, he created man and woman. He also created these institutions that are completely under attack. The first institution, I think, is his creatorship. People don't even believe he is the creator. They believe evolution. They don't believe in marriage, the bond of marriage, or they believe it and it's dissolved. And they don't believe in the Sabbath. So each one of these entities, his creation, his creative power, marriage, and the Sabbath, were blessed, they were honored, they were sealed right from the very beginning, and they will be sealed, blessed, and honored until his second coming. I want to turn to a different course now and look at the history, the influence of sex as part of idol worship. Now, we come to the last days. We're coming towards the rapidity of the closing events of the world's history. We come to a time when the mark of the beast is not far off. But when we think about all those things, and we think about idol worship, one of the things about being the mark of the beast, it's just not monetary. It's worshiping the beast more than the creator. Why do I say that? Because if you are solidified in your communication and keeping God's commandments, then you would not take the mark of the beast. If you're worshiping the world and the idols of the world, you're going to be more susceptible to the mark of the beast. Does that make sense? Idol worship has always been intricately intertwined with sex that was against the parameters of God. Matthew 24:37 and 39, we talked about Noah. He preached these things to the people, that they pursued their pleasures, their avocations, even though this doom was coming. These texts are also the first texts that wake people up to two falsities: date setting and the pre-rapture. Why do I say that? You don't set dates because you don't know when the Lord's going to come, do we? People have set dates and they were always wrong. And then the second one, secret rapture. How many people during Noah's time were part of the flood and saw it? All of them. How many people does Revelation 1:7 tell us will see Christ coming in the clouds of glory? Every eye, all of them. How many people will hear? All of them. How many people heard the thunders and the lightnings of Noah's time? All of them. So it just sets it up from the very beginning until the very end, and that's the greatness of the Bible. It goes from the very beginning, the Old Testament, until the very end. It's all intertwined, isn't it? There's no dispensationalism of it. There's no dispersing one from the other. So idol worship and sexual influences were encouraged by Satan and experienced early in Israel's history. As early as Israel was coming into the land of Canaan, to the promised land, the Canaanites, and who are the Canaanites today? Do we know? The Canaanites today are the Palestinians, the Syrians, and the Jordanians. Sound familiar? Is there still problems between them and Israel? Yes. So as they came into the borders of Canaan, the fertility religions were so apparent that the women of those fertility women's religions and of those fertility peoples tried to influence, and let's use the word lure, the men and the women of Israel into their tents and into their religions. They used sex to lure them into idol worship. Numbers 25 says, Israel sinned with Moabite women, began, and they committed sexual immorality with the daughters of Moab. The women invited and lured the people to the sacrifices of the gods. Then the people ate and bowed down to the gods, the people of Israel did, and joined them to Baal and Peor, which stirred the anger of the Lord, even to the point that they had plagues break out. And then there was a man named Zimri, one of the leaders of Israel, actually brought a prostitute right into his tent, okay, right in front of everybody, even though he was, and then Phinehas, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, and he got up from among the people and got a javelin or a spear, took it in his hand, and he thrust it down through both of them together and killed them, and it stopped the plague of that time. 24,000 people had already died before he took that action. You have to take action when there's sin. If there's sins in the church, we have to take actions. We don't take actions openly. It might be with an elder. It might be with a pastor, but we go address it, don't we? The plagues were stopped. Without knowledge of gross sexual license and characterized fertility of the religions of the ancient East, one may wonder the severity of God's condemnations and frequently used term abomination. He said that these idols and this type of sexual institutions were an abomination in his eyes. Get rid of them. Herodias, a Greek historian, said things got so bad in Babylon that every woman in Babylon was required by Babylonian law to go offer themselves in Mileta, which is Venus, as a prostitute for one time. Every person, every woman. And then once it was done, they were given a signet that it was done, that they performed their duty. Hosea, Isaiah, Jeremiah all talk about these things. Jeremiah even talks about the sins of Ashtaroth in the Lord's holy temple. Idols being in the Lord's holy temple. Prostitutes being in the Lord's holy temple. 2 Kings 22 and 23. Asa came along and, let's see, did I use the right name? The king, the young king. I have to go back, but he came along as a young king after David, and he removed all the cultic prostitutes from the land. He tore down all the temples that were false temples, and the temples for Ashtoreth and Manasseh and Baal and Marduk. The Lord prescribed clothing that was modest to the priests. Patriarchs and Prophets, page 454, describes it this way. And a later scene in Moab, beguiled with music and dancing, allured by the beauty of heathen vestiges, they cast off their fealty to Jehovah. Passion and full sway, having defiled their conscience by lewdness, they were persuaded to bow down to idols. They offered sacrifice to heathen altars and participated in the most degrading rites. No wonder Moses felt indignant enough to shatter the tables written by the finger of God that God highly approved of his, and God highly approved of his act. Surely he would otherwise have reprimanded Moses for such irreverent treatment of an object made so sacred. The worship of Balaam continued down all the way to Jeremiah and onward. I know I'm wrapping up. That's one thing I do like about Ackley. He says, if I just was 2 inches taller, I'd just take the clock down and not worry about it. The people of Egypt, same thing. They represented and worshipped unholy gods, idols, and they did it through naked prostitution, trying to lure other people into their realm. This is from Patriarchs and Prophets 3:37 and 38. Such religions violated the seventh commandment of the name of worship. When I think about that, I think about it did not only violate the seventh commandment, but it violated every commandment, because it violated the first four, honoring God, and the last six, honoring the relationship with man. So all these things violated the seventh commandment in the name of worship. The most licentious and abominable rites became a part of worship. The people represented the gods themselves as impure, and worshipers gave rein to baser passions. Unnatural vices prevailed, and universal open impurity characterized the religious festivals. The teaching of demon gods in ancient times fostered the violence, license of impurity that was not permitted or enjoined. Now, by now, you're probably asking, why in the world am I even talking about this? I'm talking about this because I see this in our own societies. I see this around the world. I see this acceptance of vile natures against God, against what He has set up. And it is all part of people worshiping false worship and idol worship, and getting people more and more and more set up to accept the mark of the beast, and further and further and further degradation away from God's truths. When we allow societies to continue being in this degraded situations and collapsing God's truth and God's commands, that society continues to collapse and becomes more susceptible to the mark of the beast. Now, for one reason, it seems to me that in spite of excellent Bible scholarships that we've had in the United States for a couple hundred years, we have only been partially aware of these changes that are continuing in our land and how bad they are. And maybe we do realize how bad they are. It explains God ordered the extermination of the Canaanites. So Joshua he massacred the whole population and left no survivor. So where does that sit with us today? Our place and our hope is that we are prepared as Christ's bride, pure wife, adorned with His love, a people keeping His commands. Individuals called out of the darkness of Satan understand that Jesus has a plan. He has a plan of love, of relationship. He has plans for health and taking care of ourselves. He has plans for us to work 6 days. Didn't He tell us to work for 6 days and take a day off? Individuals call out of the darkness of Satan and understanding the Lord has a plan. His plans from the beginning included marriage and the Sabbath. His plan included walking in His light and the light of the Word. His plan may not be socially acceptable as leading the masses to worship idols and sexual perversions, but to be fulfilled in God's love, God's compassion, God's forgiveness, God's communication requires us to take positive steps towards Him. He wants us to take steps towards Him. He wants us to pray. He wants us to ask for His help. You know, if we're financially strapped, if we're financially burdened, if we can't afford our houses, if we're under the stress of the world, if we're thinking of making bad and poor choices because of these things, God says, call my name and I will help you. I'm here for you. The positive outcome of serving the Creator rather than the creature will become solidified in the times of glory when Jesus comes. As the woman of the wife of the bride adorned, we will be made in His likeness, His glory. All these things will be fleeting memories. All the sickness that we go through, all the bad health that we go through, all the difficulties that we go through financially, all the poor choices that we have made by choosing the wrong people in our lives, marrying the wrong person, having poor relationships, all these things are fleeting and can be rectified by our lives walking in the light of the Lord. Amen? And with that, we're going to have the closing hymn.